Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. One of the most, or maybe the most important points of Dhamma practice is learning to stay in the clear knowing. It's a very simple concept, but very difficult to actually get a grasp on. It seems to be somewhat elusive to our understanding because it's so simple and immediate, and our intellect wants to make things complicated and wants to have a system that we can explain and work out details. And, the mind is attracted to that kind of a thing. Whereas something that is so utterly pristine and simple as just knowing sounds like it should be more complicated. In understanding this, there's also the problem that the simple knowing is so immediate and omnipresent, and it's the very intimate fabric of our being that it's taken for granted and overlooked. It's like the old saying about a fish unable to really understand water. Whether we're walking or sitting or lying down, whether we're idle or active, whether we're speaking or listening, working or playing, whatever we're doing, the mind is knowing. There's this quality of having an experience. This is in Pali the chitta. Thai, they sometimes call it puru, the one who knows. Pu is like a pronoun who, or somebody. Ru is a verb, knowing. And knowing here is not, the English word is kind of ambiguous. Knowing is not in the sense of understanding or having a intellectual grasp of. It's not that kind of knowing. It's just being present, knowing, having an experience. And the point of practice is to rely on, take refuge, center oneself in that simple knowing. And to see clearly the knowing and the known. The difference between the knowing and the known, this is the fundamental dualism, the last duality to go. The knowing and the known. The ordinary deluded mind doesn't see this distinction, isn't centered on the knowing. Many things arise in the field of the knowing, many different kinds of objects. There are external objects which we experience as sense objects. So in the end we internalize those too, but they have a source through the sense organs. Then there are purely internal objects that are generated by the mind. Thoughts, moods, fears, hopes, emotions, this whole gamut of phenomena that pass through the mind. And the deluded mind identifies with these objects and gets inside the thoughts or the emotions and takes them as important and real and significant, and takes them as me or mine, and invests in them a gravity and a weight and a reality that they don't have. Whereas the knowing mind, the knowing aspect of the mind, the citta, is aware of all these things, but isn't affected by them, is not moved from its primordial clarity of just knowing. Because of this utter simplicity of the knowing, all that it does is has experience. It's not capable of either being purified or defiled. It just is as it is. It's just knowing. So any kind of class of object that might arise is just an object, it's just an experience, is just that which is outside the knowing. Centered in the knowing, one is at peace. There's no conflict or turmoil there. There couldn't be, because there's nothing to rub. There's no complexity of structure to cause any sort of division. There's just the knowing. And things can be seen clearly in their own nature, and this is where wisdom arises. Delusion arises when we identify with the objects, we take them as me and mine, and we invest in them a reality and an importance that they don't have. And then we go chasing around after the objects. Whereas from the point of clear knowing, the objects are seen simply as dhammas, as phenomena, and they're understood in their own nature. And then wisdom arises. It's like seeing clearly through the object. One of the metaphors the Buddha used for an awakened mind is a man looking into a clear pool of water. A clear, still, clean, pristine pool of water. And with his vision unobstructed, he can see to the bottom, and he can see fish moving to and fro. And this metaphor of the mind as a pool of water is also used in reference to the hindrances in nivarana which obstruct the mind. Desire is like colored dye thrown into the pool. It makes the pretty color, but you can't see down to the bottom. You can't see the pebbles, and you can't see the fish going to and fro. Ill will or anger is like the waters boiling. Sloth and torpor is like it's covered in pond scum. Anxiety is like the wind is whipping up the water, so it's all churned from the wind. And skeptical doubt or uncertainty is like the water's muddy. It's dirty, so it's befouled and you can't see to the bottom. These are all obstructions that occur in the place of the objects, in the known. The knower, the clear knowing, has no desire, it has no fear, it's not obstructed by any of these defilements itself. It's simply knowing. But if the mind is like that pool of water, the knowing is like the clear sight of the man looking in the water. The mind is like the pool of water, and if the pool of water is obstructed by these defilements, then it can't be seen clearly. And that's not a problem with the knowing. That's a problem with the known. So the mind, the objects in the mind are disturbed. But the knowing, it sees that too. It sees the defilement of greed as greed and anger as anger and so on, without itself being greedy or angry. Something else to be very clear about and careful with in understanding this is not to imagine that the chitta, the knowing, is something. Now this is a problem because of our language, our use of language, and it doesn't matter whether it's English or Pali or Thai or Swahili or what. If you're going to have to use a noun to talk about mind, whereas actually there's no thing there. So when we say mind or chitta, the tendency is to think of it as a thing of some sort, whereas there's nothing there. It's utterly void and empty. There's only a knowing. It's only a verb. There's just a clear knowing. And if we make that mistake and turn it into a thing, then there's a tendency to carry on that mistake, compound it, and make that thing a self. And to think of that I am knowing. And this is not only, although it may be, it's not only entirely a naive mistake, it can also be the basis of philosophy. And I think this is basically the position of the Upanishads before the Buddha. That there is an Atman, there is an I, a knowing, that's imperishable, unchanging. As the Buddha said, well, there's a knowing, but that's all there is. It's not a thing. It has no substance or continuity, no reality that can be pointed to. So that in that way, the knowing cannot actually be known. This is a very important paradox or conundrum worth thinking about, that if you try and turn your mind into seeing the knowing, all you're going to see is a reflection or an imagination, a fabrication, some kind of idea about or image of the knowing. It's like trying to see your own eyes. Now, you can never see your own eyes. You can look in the mirror and see a reflection of your eyes, or look at a photograph and see a fixed image of your eyes, but your actual eyes you can never see. The knowing cannot become the known. So if the knowing is understood in this way, if it's understood as empty, without self-substance, utterly void. There's no place to identify with it. No. If you mistake the knowing from an I, then you're not seeing the knowing. You created another known, another object in the mind, a mental construct that you're identifying with. So letting the knowing function unimpeded and be in its own nature, just doing its thing. This is one way of understanding the quality of sati, or mindfulness, or better, recollectedness. When you identify with the objects, when you take the objects as real and significant and me and mine, that's the opposite of recollectedness. It's a forgetfulness. You've forgotten your true nature. When you have sati, you're recollecting your true nature. And you're letting your true nature express itself, your primordial nature, or your utterly natural state of being. So don't think of awakening or enlightenment or whatever term you want to use, Bodhi or Satori. Don't think of that as something to be gained, something far away. It's just returning to your natural state unimpeded. It's the most natural, primordial state of being. It's the mind before it becomes confused. In this human state of embodied existence, there are many, many ways of becoming confused and falling into that forgetfulness. This is a very complex state of being, very differentiated state of being. And all the manifest variations and differentiations and variations of the mind, these are all in the sphere of the objects. Where the knowing mind is just knowing. An image you might think of as like a tornado. You have this roaring wind that's tearing up trees and garden sheds and cats and dogs and who knows what all, and is swirling around and around. But the eye of the tornado is still. There's a still spot right in the middle. It's not affected. And if you're able to center yourself in that clear knowing and operate from there, rely on it, then you can do anything. Now, any activity you undertake, you'll do it with clarity, and you'll do it with efficiency and straightforwardly. It's not a practice just for when you're sitting still in meditation. To be able to find that clear center, you can carry that forth into any activity. And any activity you undertake will then be more successful. And in the end, the highest realizations come from just this. When the objects are seen as just phenomena, impermanent, empty of self-substance, conditioned, imperfect, ever-changing, and the knowing is seen as utterly void. Then the whole of samsaric becoming unravels. The delusion, the spell is broken, and one can have the supreme awakening and realize the unconditioned.